My girlfriend spent our entire engagement fund on a fake pregnancy scam. I thought I was building a future with the woman I loved, but I was just funding a $47,000 fantasy. My name is Alex, and I was 28 years old when my entire world was meticulously dismantled and then set on fire. Before the flames, though, there was a dream, a beautiful, vibrant dream built on 5 years of love with a woman named Maya. We weren't just a couple, we were a team. We met in a crowded coffee shop, a classic meet cute, where we both reached for the last blueberry scone. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes, and let me have it. That was Maya, always generous, always thinking of others. Our relationship blossomed from that moment, a steady, comfortable warmth that I had come to depend on. We talked about everything, our fears, our ambitions, the ridiculous names we'd give our future dog. And central to all those conversations was our future, a shared vision of a life built together. A year into our relationship, we started a joint savings account. We called it the Forever Fund. Every paycheck, a portion would automatically transfer. It was for a down payment on a house, for the wedding we both dreamed of, for the life we were meticulously, joyfully planning. By the time I turned 27, that fund had grown to $47,000. It was our nest egg, a tangible symbol of our commitment. Then, on a crisp Tuesday evening in October, the dream got a name, a face, a due date. Maya came home from work, her eyes shining with a secret she could barely contain. She led me to the living room, her hand trembling in mine, and told me she was pregnant. The joy that exploded in my chest was so powerful, it felt like a physical force. I swept her off my feet, spinning her around our small living room as tears of pure happiness streamed down my face. We were going to be parents. We were going to be a family. The next few weeks were a blur of excited planning. We looked at bigger apartments, debated minivans, and I started a new savings account, this one for the baby. Maya seemed to be glowing, her happiness infectious. She was more attentive, more loving than ever. But there was a new undercurrent to her behavior, a subtle shift I initially chalked up to the hormonal roller coaster of early pregnancy. She became fiercely protective of her phone. If I walked into a room while she was texting, the screen would go dark instantly. She mentioned doctor's appointments, but always ones she had to attend alone, explaining that the first few visits were just routine paperwork and blood work, no need for me to take time off work. I didn't question it. Why would I? I was in love, and I was about to be a father. Our entire future, the one we'd so carefully saved for, was finally coming into focus. I was so busy looking at the beautiful picture she had painted for me that I didn't see the tiny cracks forming in the canvas, the faint smell of turpentine lingering in the air. The subtle oddities of Maya's pregnancy began to coalesce into a pattern of behavior that set my teeth on edge, a low-level hum of anxiety that I couldn't quite place. It was the little things. She'd have sudden, hushed phone conversations in the bathroom, the sound of the fan drowning out her words. When I'd ask who she was talking to, she'd wave it off as her mother, wanting to know the latest pregnancy symptom details she was too embarrassed to share with me. Her mother, a woman who broadcast every minor detail of her life on Facebook, had never once mentioned a private call. Then there were the cravings. One night she begged me to go out at 11 o'clock for pickles and peanut butter. A classic pregnancy trope. I drove to 3 different stores, finally finding them, and returned home a hero, only to find her fast asleep on the couch, the craving completely forgotten. The next morning, the jar of pickles remained unopened in the refrigerator. She laughed it off, blaming pregnancy brain, but the incident left a cold knot in my stomach. It felt performative, like she was playing a role she'd seen in a movie. The secrecy around her medical care was the most concerning part. I had offered numerous times to clear my schedule and go with her to appointments. I wanted to hear the heartbeat, to see the first blurry ultrasound picture. Each time she had a reason. The first one was just a confirmation visit, nothing to see yet. The next one, the lab had a policy against partners in the waiting room due to limited space. The excuses were plausible, but they were constant. I was being systematically excluded from the most fundamental experience of our supposed new chapter. The financial side of things started to feel strange too. I managed our forever fund, but Maya had her own personal checking account. She started talking about needing money for specialized prenatal vitamins and private birthing class deposits. The amounts she mentioned were small at first, $50 here, $100 there, but they were becoming more frequent. I didn't think much of it. Prenatal care was expensive, and I was more than willing to cover any cost for our child. I transferred the money she asked for without question, my focus entirely on the well-being of my future family. The turning point, the moment the hum of anxiety became a blaring alarm, happened on a rainy Saturday. I was looking for a stamp to mail a bill and remembered Maya kept office supplies in a drawer of her nightstand. I pulled the drawer open, and underneath a stack of notepads and pens, I saw a thick envelope. It wasn't sealed. Curiosity, a trait that had always served me well, got the better of me. Inside weren't letters or cards, but bank statements from her personal account. I shouldn't have looked, I know that now, but I did. And as my eyes scanned the columns of numbers and transactions, the beautiful, vibrant world I was living in began to crack, shatter, and fall away around me. The first few lines of the bank statement didn't seem alarming. They were the usual transactions: a grocery store, a subscription to a streaming service, a payment to our cell phone provider. But as I flipped to the second page, a pattern emerged that made my blood run cold. There were dozens, no hundreds of payments, all ranging from $200 to $2,000. They weren't made to pharmacies or medical clinics. They were made to individuals through apps like Venmo, Cash App, and Zelle. The names were a random assortment of common and uncommon identities: A. Nguyen, K. Smith, R. Garcia, J. Williams, L. Chen. Some had accompanying notes like consultation fee, phase 2 payment, or urgent lab work. Others were just a string of numbers. My heart began to pound against my ribs like a trapped bird. I flipped to the third page, then the fourth. The payments went back almost 6 months, starting just a week before she had told me she was pregnant. I did the math in my head, my fingers trembling as I tapped the calculator app on my phone. I added up the totals, page by agonizing page. The sum was staggering, a number so large it made me feel dizzy. $47,000, the exact amount in our forever fund, the money we had saved for years, the money for our wedding, our house, our future, was gone. And it hadn't gone to doctors or vitamins. It had been funneled in small and large increments to a seemingly endless list of strangers on the internet. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the paper statements crinkling in my sweaty grip. The room started to spin. The secretive phone calls, the fake cravings, the excuses for missing doctor's appointments. It all slammed into me at once, a tidal wave of horrifying clarity. This wasn't about prenatal care. This was something else entirely. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, a shred of hope that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. Maybe she was being blackmailed. Maybe she had a gambling addiction I knew nothing about. But the notes on the payments, fertility treatment, hormone therapy, guaranteed conception program, pointed to a much more twisted and specific deception. She had been paying for something related to the pregnancy. But what kind of fertility treatment cost $47,000 and was paid to random people through Venmo? The ground had completely fallen out from under me. The woman I loved, the mother of my unborn child, had lied to me. She had taken our collective dream and liquidated it, sending it piecemeal into the digital ether. I didn't know what the truth was, but I knew with absolute certainty that the life I thought I was living was a meticulously crafted illusion. The sound of the front door opening echoed through the apartment. Maya was home from her prenatal yoga class. I had a choice. I could pretend I hadn't seen the statements, slide them back into the drawer, and live in the beautiful lie she had built. Or I could step out of the illusion and demand the truth, no matter how devastating it might be. I stood up, the papers clutched in my hand, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I walked out of the bedroom to meet her. Maya was standing in the entryway, shaking out her wet umbrella, a cheerful smile on her face. She looked so normal, so completely unaware of the seismic shift that had just occurred in our living room. She started telling me about her class, about a new breathing technique she'd learned, but her voice was just a distant buzz in my ears. All I could see were the names and numbers from the bank statements flashing behind my eyes. I didn't say a word. I simply walked to the coffee table and laid the papers out, spreading them like a gruesome hand of cards. The smile on her face faltered, then vanished completely. Her eyes darted from the papers to my face, and a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic flashed in their depths. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking ashen and small. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the rain lashing against the windows and the frantic, silent screaming in my own head. Then the performance began. Her eyes welled with tears, perfect crystalline drops that traced paths down her pale cheeks. She started to shake, her entire body trembling with a sorrow that looked, for all the world, completely genuine. She stammered out an explanation, a story so elaborate and desperate it was almost impressive. She confessed that she hadn't been going to a regular doctor. She said she had been diagnosed with a rare and difficult-to-treat fertility condition right before we conceived. The standard doctors, she claimed, had given her a grim prognosis. Terrified of losing me, of losing the dream of our family, she had searched online for alternative solutions. That's where she found them. A discreet, exclusive network of fertility specialists who operated outside of the traditional medical system. They offered a cutting-edge, holistic program that combined hormonal treatments with energy healing and personalized genetic therapy. It was expensive, she sobbed, and it had to be kept secret because the methods were controversial and not yet approved by the FDA. The payments, she explained, went to different practitioners all over the world. A specialist in Switzerland for the gene therapy, a herbalist in Brazil for the hormonal balancing, a lab technician in Japan for the proprietary testing. She had been sending the money directly to them to cut out the middleman and save costs. She had wanted to surprise me, she wept, with a positive pregnancy result after the doctors had told her it was impossible. She had been doing it all for us. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, a story tailor-made to prey on my love for her and my desire to believe in a miracle. A part of me, the part that was still desperately in love with the woman I thought she was, wanted to believe her. It was easier to believe in a secret international fertility conspiracy than it was to believe that the person I trusted most in the world had concocted a massive, heartless fraud. The story was insane, but her pain felt real. The tears, the shaking, the desperate pleading in her eyes, it was a powerful combination. I looked at her, at the woman I had planned to spend my life with, and felt a war raging inside me. My gut screamed that it was a lie, but my heart ached to accept her apology and move on. In the end, exhaustion won. I was too tired, too heartbroken to fight. I told her I needed time. I gathered the statements, walked back to the bedroom, and locked the door. I didn't believe her, not really. But by not immediately throwing her out, by allowing her story to hang in the air, I had given her a sliver of hope. And in doing so, I had condemned myself to a few more days of living in a lie, my mind now working overtime, searching for the final, irrefutable piece of evidence that would shatter her story completely. The next 48 hours were a waking nightmare. I barely slept, my mind churning with a maelstrom of doubt, anger, and a profound sense of loss. I moved through the apartment like a ghost, sharing space with Maya but remaining worlds apart. She tiptoed around me, her eyes red-rimmed and perpetually apologetic, constantly asking if I needed anything, if there was anything she could do to make it better. Her presence was suffocating. Every time she tried to touch me, I flinched away. The story she had spun was so fragile, so outlandish, that I knew it would collapse under the slightest bit of scrutiny. So I started to dig. Late at night, with Maya asleep in the other room, I sat at my laptop and began my own investigation. I started with the name of the fertility network she had given me, A quick search brought up a website that looked like it had been designed in the early 2000s. It was full of grainy stock photos of smiling babies and doctors in white coats, the text riddled with grammatical errors and grandiose, unprovable claims. There was no physical address listed, no credentials for the supposed specialists, just a contact form and a promise of discreet, life-changing results. It was a digital phantom, a shell company designed to look legitimate at a glance. Next, I turned my attention to the bank statements. I started cross-referencing the names she had paid with social media profiles. A. Nguyen was a college student in Texas who posted about ramen noodles and video games. K. Smith was a grandmother in Florida who shared pictures of her grandchildren in her garden. R. Garcia was a mechanic in California. These weren't international fertility specialists. They were ordinary people, likely victims themselves, who had been paid to receive and forward funds, a common money laundering technique used by online scammers. The pieces were clicking into place with horrifying speed. Maya wasn't a victim of a controversial medical program. She was the victim of a classic predatory internet scam. But that didn't absolve her. She had perpetuated the lie, using it to drain our entire future. The final, devastating blow came when I remembered something from months ago. Maya had been doing some online shopping, and I had glanced over her shoulder at her screen. I saw an item in her cart that I had thought was a joke at the time, a professional silicone pregnancy bump used for movies and theatrical productions. She had closed the tab quickly when she saw me looking, laughing it off as a gag gift for a friend's bachelorette party. The memory, once dismissed, now hit me with the force of a physical blow. I got up, walked to the bookshelf where we kept our shared tablet, and opened the browser history. There it was, the order confirmation, dated 3 months ago. Professional silicone bump, size 4 months. Below it, another order a few weeks later for a 5-month bump and a fetal Doppler audio player. She hadn't just lied about being pregnant, she had purchased the props. She had staged the entire thing. The pregnancy wasn't just a financial scam, it was a complete theatrical fabrication. There was no baby. There never had been. I leaned back in my chair, the tablet feeling heavy in my hands. The last thread of hope, the tiny part of me that had been clinging to her story, snapped. The truth was no longer a murky possibility. It was a stark, brutal reality. I had all the evidence I needed. The fake website, the random recipients, the silicone prosthetic. The performance was over. I didn't wait for morning. The weight of the truth was too heavy to carry a moment longer. I walked into our bedroom, the tablet in my hand. Maya was asleep, her face soft and peaceful in the dim light. For a fleeting second, I saw the woman I fell in love with, and a wave of grief so intense it almost buckled my knees washed over me. I gently shook her shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open, a look of confusion quickly replaced by fear as she saw my expression. I didn't say anything. I just placed the tablet on her nightstand, the screen displaying the order confirmation for the fake baby bump. Her eyes scanned the screen, and all the color drained from her face for a second time. This time, there was no performance. There were no crocodile tears or frantic excuses. There was only a hollow, vacant silence. The elaborate story she had constructed, the intricate web of lies, collapsed in on itself. She stared at the screen, then at me, and her face crumbled. It wasn't the controlled, pretty crying from before. It was a raw, guttural sob, the sound of a person who has lost everything. The truth came pouring out of her in a torrent of fragmented, self-loathing confessions. She was never pregnant. She had bought the pregnancy tests online, the kind that come with a positive result already printed. She had faked every symptom, every craving. The scam had started small. She had seen an ad online for a fertility booster supplement, a simple one-time payment of $99. When that didn't magically result in a pregnancy, the scammers contacted her directly. They told her she was a special case, that she had been chosen for an exclusive multi-stage program. They groomed her, isolating her from reality, feeding her a steady diet of false hope and escalating demands for money. They told her the treatments were working, that her body was almost ready. The pressure to produce a positive result, to justify the thousands of dollars she was secretly siphoning from our savings, became immense. So, she took the final step. She faked the pregnancy. She thought if she could just get pregnant for real, she could make it all right. She could erase the debt and the lies. She bought the bumps and the fake Doppler recordings, not just to fool me, but to fool herself, to live in the fantasy she had paid so dearly for. Listening to her, I felt a strange and terrible mix of emotions. There was rage at the betrayal, at the sheer audacity of the deception. There was pity for the desperate, lonely woman who had fallen so deep into a scam that she was willing to destroy our life to sustain it. And there was a profound, soul-crushing sadness. The person I thought I knew, the kind, generous, loving Maya, was gone. In her place was this stranger, a woman so broken and terrified of abandonment that she had orchestrated a catastrophe. The love I had for her curdled into something unrecognizable, a toxic mix of pity and disgust. There was no coming back from this. The trust, the foundation of our entire relationship, had not just been broken, it had been vaporized. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale gray light into the room, I knew what I had to do. The dream was over. It was time to wake up. The silence after her confession was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered the last remnants of our life together. I stood up, my body feeling like it was made of lead, and walked to the closet. I pulled out a suitcase and began to pack. I didn't fold my clothes, I just shoved them in, my movements mechanical, detached. Maya watched me from the bed, her face a mask of utter devastation, but she didn't try to stop me. What could she say? There were no words left that could fix this. Every object I picked up felt tainted with a lie. The coffee mug she had bought me for my birthday, the sweater she had stolen from my closet and claimed as her own, the framed photo of us on vacation, they were all props in a play I hadn't known I was performing. Leaving the apartment was like walking out of a crime scene, where I was both the victim and the only witness. The drive to my parents' house was a blur. I had to call them and explain in halting, mortified sentences that I was not, in fact, about to be a father, and that my 5-year relationship had ended in a spectacular act of financial and emotional fraud. Their shock and concern were a distant comfort, but I was encased in a numb shell. The following weeks were a blur of legal consultations and painful conversations. A lawyer confirmed what I already suspected. Getting the money back was a near impossibility. The scammers were overseas, untraceable, and Maya had willingly sent the funds. A lawsuit against her would be a hollow victory, like trying to get blood from a stone. She was broke, her credit ruined, and her reputation in tatters. I had to accept the $47,000 was gone. It was the price of a devastating lesson in trust. The hardest part was the grieving process. I wasn't just mourning the end of a relationship. I was mourning the death of a future that had never existed. I was mourning the loss of the woman I thought Maya was. I replayed every moment of our last year, analyzing every conversation, every look, searching for the point where the lie began. It was an exercise in self-torture. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to rebuild. I moved into a small, soulless apartment. I focused on my work. I reconnected with friends I had neglected. I started running, the rhythmic pounding of my feet on the pavement a meditative act of reclaiming my own body, my own life. There were days the anger would flare up, hot and blinding, and I would have to force myself to remember the broken, pathetic woman she had become, not the monster my pain wanted her to be. It's been a year now. The financial wound is slowly scabbing over. The emotional one is a deep scar, a permanent reminder of the fantasy I once lived. I don't know where Maya is, and I don't allow myself to wonder. I had lost everything I thought I was building, but in the ruins, I found something I had lost along the way: myself. I was alone, but I was no longer living a lie. And for the first time in a very long time, the ground beneath my feet felt solid, real, and entirely my own.